What do you think? Would you make that trade? Would you trade Trent Williams for Ursery and a day 3 pick?
Well, I was talking about a potential Trent Williams trade earlier this week, and I know it sounds crazy to do something like that because he's the only elite player on an offensive line that is very average, and he
Right.
makes the offensive line average. And if you were to lose Trent Williams right now, as currently constituted, the Niners would have one of the worst offensive lines in football. But he's going to be 38 years old. John Lynch even said that's making things a little bit tricky. And if you can trade Trent Williams away and you can get some really quality draft picks back, and you can maybe draft an offensive tackle who you really like in the first round or the second round, that's a way to reset financially and get a lot younger on the offensive side of the ball. And what have we been talking about over the last couple of years? How the Niners need to find a Trent Williams replacement. I think a trade is the only thing that makes sense because of the dead money that would be at play if the Niners were to cut him. If they cut him pre-June 1, it's $34 million in dead money.
Wow.
And only $4.6 million in cap savings. So it literally makes no sense to cut Trent Williams. Why would you move on from an elite player? Now, you don't want him playing in 2026 under the cap number of nearly $39 million, but
can't do that.
Can you restructure it in a way, kind of like what the Houston Texans, Larry, did last night with Danielle Hunter, where they gave him like a $40 million extension for 1 year. And those players are similar because they're still premier players, still producing at a really high level, but they're older, so you don't want to tie them up to a long-term contract extension. But you talk about a potential trade, right? Ariante Ursery is a player who you and I liked in the pre-draft process last year. Played a lot at Minnesota, has a good body type. I think he'd be a good scheme fit. I like the body of work when he was a Golden Gopher. He's a young player who you can build with. But honestly, what I'd rather do is probably draft an offensive tackle at 27 overall. And you could look at Blake Miller out of Clemson. You could look at Ianachor out of Arizona State, who I really like, who had an excellent Senior Bowl and a great combine. I don't think that Caden Proctor will be available, but he primarily only played left tackle at Alabama. If he can keep his weight down, I think that he could be a really good player. I don't think the Utah offensive tackles are going to be available. Fano and Lemieux, Fano, I think he's going to go in the top 15. I think Muaga, the offensive tackle out of Miami, if I got that name right, I think he's going to go potentially.
I think it's it might be Maui Goa.
Maui Noah or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Monroe Freeling, the offensive tackle out of Georgia, is a left tackle who's very gifted, not a lot of experience, but he tested great at the NFL Combine. I think that he could go inside the top 15. So I think it's those prior names that I mentioned that you could get, or an Ariante Ursery, and then you're able to address another position of need, whether it be wide receiver, whether it be defensive tackle or defensive end. This is a draft that lacks star power and quarterbacks, but it is a draft where there's some really quality depth at certain positions. And I know you did a video on this yesterday or the day before, that range of 50 to 75. If you can get a pick there, I think that you can get some really quality players in that range.
Let's talk defensive end. There's a lot of talk this morning about Max Crosby. I've heard people connect the Niners to Max Crosby. The talk is the Raiders want 2 number ones. They want a Micah Parsons project, 2 number ones, and a Micah Parsons, that kind of a Parsons project. I'm thinking Alan Parsons project. The Micah Parsons, package is what I'm looking for, which is 2 number ones and Kenny Clark. That's what they want for Crosby. I don't think the Niners have that, but there is a lot of talk about the Niners' interest in Crosby. There's talk about the Niners' interest in Trey Hendrickson. And then today, just moments ago, the Packers released Pro Bowl defensive end Rashawn Gary.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Chase? I mean, these guys all have their pros and cons. I kind of think if the price was right, I think Gary might be the guy. He's 280 plus pounds. He's a big edge setter on first and second down, and yet he's got the ability to bend the edge and get the quarterback on third down. He's not going to cost you as much money as Hendrickson. He's not going to cost you draft capital like Crosby. And yet he's a very special player. He had 7.5 sacks last year. What do you think of Rashawn Gary? He's always been thought to be like the super mega star who hasn't quite ever put it together Could he put it together in San Francisco with Kasarik?
Yeah, so that news was more of like a cap type of maneuver for Green Bay, and Green Bay is going to try to find a trade partner for Rashawn Gary. But when that news comes out of like, hey, we're going to release him unless we can trade him, oftentimes there isn't a trade partner there because teams are like, okay, do we give up players and or draft picks, or do we just wait for that player to get released and then we can sign him to a contract that we think is a good contract for our team? I like Rashawn Gary as a player, and I think it's worth looking into a player like that. He's put together some really good years, especially the last two under Jeff Hafley. He kind of became underrated or under talked about after the acquisition of Micah Parsons, which is totally understandable. Has he ended up being like a star player that some people envision? I wouldn't say he's been a star player, but I think he's been a very good player. And I think his contract for this upcoming season is worth what, $19-20 million. If you're looking at a player like that in this robust, booming edge rusher market, and you can get like 8 to 10 sacks for around $19 million, it's really worth it. I mean, this is an era in which the premier pass rushers are making between $30 and $40 million, right? So if you can get a player like Rashawn Gary at 19-20, you can get a player like Jonathan Grenard, another trade piece with Minnesota, at $19 million, and Grenard is under contract for the next 2 years. I think those are the types of moves that make a lot of sense for San Francisco. You put that player opposite of Nick Bosa. You've got Michael Williams to play defensive end and defensive tackle, and a player like Jonathan Grenard fits the scheme. I mean, he had 12.5 sacks under D'Amico Ryans a couple of years ago. He's a really good edge setter in the run game. He's still in his late 20s, and he's under contract for the next 2 seasons. So a player like Crosby, I don't think makes as much sense for the Niners because he's going to be 29. He's ended the last 3 years hurt. The Niners as an organization have so many health issues, and his cap hit is more than $30 million. So would you rather just go a guy like Jonathan Grenard, a guy like Rashawn Gary, who's a fraction of that price? These players are younger than Max Crosby, have fewer injury concerns than Max Crosby, and you don't have to mortgage the farm like you would have to for a Max Crosby. I think that's kind of what the Niners' thinking is here at the defensive end spot, or it should be at least.
What do you think of Jalen Phillips? I mean, you saw him in Philly. It's funny. I was joking with somebody the other day. I'm like, when the Niners upset the Eagles, I walked down to the locker room, and as I'm walking out of the locker room, there's Jalen Phillips walking out of the stadium with his girl, and he's got just a big smile on his face, and he's laughing, and it's like, I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, man, if I was an Eagles fan, man, this would rub me wrong. It's like you just lost at home to the lowly Niners who rolled in, totally decimated. You're the defending Super Bowl champions, and you're walking out of the stadium with a big, S-eating grin on your face. It rubbed me wrong, but maybe that's just the way I am.